Well, hello everyone and welcome to week 55 and 56 of my life as an L3 CTS cadet pilot. In this week's episode, well, the 2 weeks worth of roundup we're doing this in this episode, we are finally in the Cessna 172 G1000. Roll titles. So, we're out of the sim now and we're in the Cessna 172 G1000 aircraft. So it's been a couple of weeks since I've actually flown an aircraft, but it's good to be back in them now. So I didn't upload a video last week because I'd only done 2 flights at that point, so I felt I'd probably get a couple more in, and it turns out I ended up doing 5 flights. And in total in the Cessna on the ATPL course we do 8 flights. 5 just overhead Hamilton and 3 en route flights, 2 of which are student pilot in command. So the first flight you're just doing tracking. It's basically these flights that we do are essentially the same as what we do in the sim, but actually in the air. So obviously you've got the added pressure of actually being an aircraft and you can't press a freeze button to stop you mid-air. So on my first lesson I actually had a bit of a problem with the booking system, because there were so many of us booked for IFR flights at the time that I was due to go. There wasn't enough slots for all of us, and unfortunately for me I drew the short straw and it looked like I was going to actually end up being cancelled. But because we was only doing a tracking lesson, we ended up going to a waypoint out over Mount Kaori, which is near Raglan, and there's a point called Poken, and instead of using the Hamilton VOR, we used this waypoint called Poken as like a simulated VOR, and that was more than adequate for the tracking lesson. And then, yeah, tracking wise it all went fine, no problems, just like in the sim really, just a bit slower because it's a Cessna. But then we came back into Hamilton and we flew a VOR only approach, so that was a nice little challenge. And then as we was on final approach, as we passed the final approach fix, I made my call to say that I was final approach fix, which is about 5 miles away for runway 18. The tower actually asked us to do a circling approach for runway 25. And the reason why they wanted us to do that is so that they could backtrack an Air New Zealand ATR 72 down the runway, so once we crossed over that runway onto 25, they could go straight into a takeoff, whereas if we continued for 18, we'd have landed, then they would have had to have done a backtrack. So it actually worked out better for all of us because we don't really get much opportunity to do circling approaches, so that was quite good. There's also going to be a video clip at the end of this video showing some of that circling approach. The great thing about being in 4-seat aircraft now is that we can now take backseat passengers with us. Well, I say passengers, other L3 cadets, like you can't be taking up family members, but you can take out students up, so that's quite good, and if they're pretty nimble with the camera you can get some pretty nice shots, so hopefully more of that coming up in the future. So anyhow, that landing was a good one, but next lesson was VOR holds and approaches, and yeah, same issues with the booking system, but we did manage to wangle it in our favour this time. We couldn't have it going wrong twice in a row, and actually I had a different instructor for this lesson, so that was something different. And basically it's just VOR holds and approaches, exactly the same thing as in the sim, but obviously added pressures on. 2 VOR DME approaches for runway 18 and 1 VOR only approach. Now, I'm not sure if I've explained this before, but the difference between a VOR DME approach and a VOR only approach is VOR DME, you do your turns at set distances. So I think for runway 18 you track outbound until you have, I think it's either 10 or 11 miles on the DME, then you make your right hand turn inbound to intercept the track. Whereas with a VOR only approach, you do what's known as a timed outbound leg. So for us we do a 3-minute outbound leg, then we turn, but because of wind we might not be at the same distance every time. So what we do is we intentionally descend below profile, descend down to 100 above minimum descent altitude, fly level with that, until you become either missed approach, which is when you go over the VOR, or you become visual of the runway, which is then you transfer to a visual approach. So that was quite good. Although on that particular day there was a really strong crosswind, and I have to admit I may have messed the landing up a bit, but the aircraft's in one piece and no harm done. But yeah, that certainly damaged my confidence a bit, but hey ho, only the second time landing the Cessna here, so can't complain about the odd bad landing here and there. So, next lesson, back with my normal instructor. This time instead of doing VOR approach to holds and approaches, we did GPS holds and approaches. And again, did, how many of those did I do? Did 3 holds and approaches on this lesson. The GPS is a little bit different to the VOR in that it's more accurate, but there's more things that can go wrong. For example, you have to make sure that you unsuspend the OBS if you're going to be staying in the hold for a bit longer. That's if you've got the hold programmed in. If you haven't got it in, you have to unsuspend it. And sorry, you have to suspend it, and then once you want to leave the hold, you have to unsuspend it, and then it tells the aircraft that you want to continue with the approach. So anyhow, weather was a bit better on this particular day. All of my holds were very good. My approaches, 2 of them I did drop below minimum descent altitude, which on a instrument ratings skills test is technically a foul, so don't really want to be doing that. And on my last one, not my last one, that's the next lesson, so anyhow, the first 2 where I went and missed, I busted minimum descent altitude on both of them, and the last one we just landed, so that's definitely going to be one of the things I need to watch out for, particularly if you're on a fairly steep approach profile. And then the next lesson, exactly the same thing, more GPS holds and approaches, and it was on this one, on my first approach, I busted MDA again. So then I was like, right, on the next one, I was literally like, right, don't bust it, you've done it so many times now, it's getting ridiculous. And literally like, as soon as I called go around, literally just went pitch up power at the same time. And I was probably within about 10 feet of busting MDA again, so when you call go around, you've got to react extremely quick, because like we call it at we look at 100 feet and we have to call it at 50 feet. But if you're on a fairly steep profile, that can go very quickly, so you've got to be very careful of that. And then my final approach, on my final one we got a bit bored of doing GPS, so we did another VOR DME. This time it was runway 36 in use. So we couldn't do a VOR only approach because that's not available on that runway. Anyhow, final thing to talk about in this episode is the last overhead Hamilton IFR flight in the Cessna. And for me this was quite interesting because thank goodness the night before I did some extra planning, because if I hadn't, I could have been in a spot of bother. So I woke up in the morning, my flight was in the afternoon, I think it was like 2 o'clock, and the first thing I woke up to was my phone ringing, and it was my instructor saying, oh, good news, I brought your flight forward, can you get in within in under an hour? And I was like, yeah, I can make that work. And so yeah, quickly got changed very quickly, got all my kit together, made it into L3, and like my instructor, like he actually said to me afterwards, I wasn't expecting you to be like all ready to go, because he had actually was doing a mass brief at the time I got in, and he literally came out of the mass brief and was like, oh blimey, you actually made it in on time. I was like, I'm not only in, flight plans all ready to be submitted, although I did accidentally submit one of them, silly me. But he checked it all through, it was all fine, so he thought, I'll come back to that in a minute. And we taxied out bang on time, so that was good news, so I ended up getting the day done nice and early. And then, yeah, called up the tower for my clearance, and they called back and said, oh, we don't have your IFR flight plan. And I thought, well, that's very strange, because I've already submitted that. And then about a minute later they come back and said, oh, we've just found your flight plan, it was submitted in local time and not UTC. That was my fault. Whoops, won't be making that mistake again, that's a bit of an amateur error. But hey ho, considering how rushed the everything was for that flight, yeah, I was quite pleased with how it all went. And we did one VOR DME approach, one GPS approach, and then because like both of them went flawlessly, like didn't bust MDA, I was nowhere near this time, so it looks like I got that nailed. to change things up, normally at this point we would just do more VOR and VOR, DME and GPS approaches, but my instructor came up with a very good idea. He said, "Oh, have you done DME arc before?" And I was like, "Well, no." He's like, "Have you done mass brief before?" I was like, "No, that's part of the twin course." And he's like, "Well, I'm happy with everything I've seen so far. We've got 5 minutes until we intercept the arc. I'll teach you how to do a DME arc." And that was good fun, that was. So we ended up flying a DME arc, pretty much coming in from the east, flew all the way around to this small hill here, and then intercepted the RNAV Yankee approach for runway 36. So that was very good of my instructor to do that, because it meant that we wasn't just bimbling around wasting time doing holds and approaches that we knew I was fine with. So that was really good. Anyhow, so what's going to be coming up in next week's episode? Well, hopefully next week, it might be the week after, depends on how good or bad the weather's been. Today it's quite reasonable actually, just a few puffy clouds around. It's actually VFR for once. But yeah, then we've got 3 more Cessna flights to do. They're all en route. First one is a dual, probably going to be either to Taranga or Rotorua, and then the second one will be whichever one we don't do. And then the third one is a 2.5-hour one. I'm hoping to get to New Plymouth on that flight. If not, I'm going to probably go to Whakatane. So New Plymouth is down here, Whakatane is over here, Rotorua here, Taranga here, Hamilton in the middle. You get the picture. So, I'd like to say thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and recommend this series to anyone who you feel might benefit from watching this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy. Bye bye.